Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pizzapia. That man bopping his head ready for week one is Kyle Yates, and it's you. And we are excited for the football season. We are kind of caught in between. Yates was telling me before the show, we're somewhere between week one and draft still going on. So if you still got drafts, you need a little last minute help, we're going to help you today. However, this is also very useful and applicable when looking at your rosters that you've already drafted. Also looking around for trades potentially already. I know you guys are crazy out there. That's why you're part of the Fantasy Pros family, because you just eat, sleep, drink, breathe fantasy football just like we do. And Yates, this is kind of a weird in-between because there are a few days left here to draft. Right up until the season starts, some people like to draft on Thursday night right before the game starts, and I can't blame them.
It's so funny. Like I'm getting questions still on Twitter and on Instagram and all that are like asking draft questions. I'm like, come on, people. I've turned that part of my brain off. Let's go. Come on. We're into week one. I'm writing the week one fantasy projections article, like 7 games in already. And I'm at like 8,800 or 8,500 words already. So, man, I am ready for week one. We have Dallas and Tampa Bay on Thursday night. I just cannot wait, Joe.
Oh, it's going to be so exciting, man. I already saw the hype video this morning for the game. I'm ready to go. My kids are excited. The family's going to be glued to the giant television. Thursday night football. But before we get to all of that, I want to remind everybody to make sure you go over to fantasypros.com/contest because we got that Kyler Murray football that is autographed that we're giving away thanks to our friends at Pristine Auction. All you got to do is go do a review of the show on Apple Podcasts or CastBox, screenshot that bad boy, go to fantasypros.com/contest, upload it, and you are entered to win the Kyler Murray autograph ball and anything else the rest of the year we give away. But if you're a listener of the show and you really are listening carefully, you'll know that if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you get a 3x entry. That's right, 3 more entries just for subscribing to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/fantasypros when you enter that contest. So do that as well. Get all your screenshots ready. Get yourself some free stuff just for listening to the show. It's a beautiful thing. You can impress all your friends and family members with all the cool swag we're going to give away this season. The Kyler Murray ball. Who knows? Kyler Murray could be MVP. You never know. He could be QB1 this year. It's very possible. But when we're looking, Yates, at the running backs and looking at the top, it's a pretty clear tier. What we're going to do today is go tier by tier after that pretty much. Talk about the half PPR expert consensus rankings at running back. We're going to go through each one, talk about some of the guys, where we like them, if you still got drafts going on, where maybe Kyle has some difference of opinion in terms of the ranking, just to kind of flush it out one more time for everybody. And Yates, that running back position, really, we keep talking about it. There is a drop-off, there is a cliff, and it became even more significant with some of the injuries that we saw this offseason.
Yeah, losing Cam Akers, Travis Etienne, J.K. Dobbins, like all 3 of those guys were set to make significant contributions for fantasy football. Now you've got guys that will step up right in their place. You've got James Robinson, you've got Darrell Henderson, you've got James Robinson. So these guys, did I say James Robinson twice?
You might have, but you really like James Robinson.
Yep, whatever.
Well, how do you feel about James Robinson?
Yeah, James Robinson, like him. Mentioned him twice. Anyway, so yeah, I think that these guys have stepped up, and Gus Edwards, right? They will step up into those roles, and they will be fantasy relevant, obviously, but to the same level, maybe not. So I think with the running back position, it's important to load up on that position in your draft, and we've talked about that, like, mock draft season is done. Again, we're heading into week one. So if you're still drafting, place more of a priority on that running back position, but then still being aware of the value of the running back position, right? This is the last show that we're doing before we move into like week one specific content. So, and we wanted to focus in on the running back position because of how important and crucial it is for fantasy football success to be able to have the depth here. So we're going to run tier by tier. We're going to run through these players and just kind of talk about the last minute changes, last minute tweaks, and just kind of make sure that you guys are set as we head into week one.
You know what's fascinating, Yates, with those 3 names that we mentioned that had the injuries, those are all guys in that RB2 category for the most part, right? I mean, some people will add Akers higher, but let's be honest, pretty much RB2 territory. And what that means is all of a sudden the depth becomes very questionable. Now, the good news is most of the guys at the top in this first round, we're still having here in week one as we approach the season, which is good news. Even Saquon Barkley with that latest news we got from him. And that's kind of, I think, more to that point that you're making also, which is when you're looking at this, elite running back tier, it's still intact through the preseason. Right. It's that middle tier that all of a sudden got decimated. So when you see the middle tier get decimated a little bit, how does that impact, let's say, some of the rookies that you got coming in here, like the Carters, the Sermons, the Javonte Williams? Is that automatic bump up for you, generally speaking? Or is it more of the pivot to the guys who are, taking up the mantle, the Hendersons, the Edwards, those kind of guys, and the James Robinson, who I know you're a big fan of because you mentioned him 7 times.
Yeah, I think that it definitely places more of a priority and importance on the guys that will be stepping up, because we have those are clear roles now. Right, with James Robinson, there was some ambiguity. It was, okay, is he going to take, what kind of role is he going to have with Travis Etienne in this offense? With Darrell Henderson, I thought he was going to be involved, but definitely not to the level that Cam Akers was. So now we have that clarity. We have this idea of what exactly the roles are going to be. With guys like Michael Carter, Trey Sermon, these types of rookies that are coming in, there's ambiguity in their backfields until it gets cleared up here. And we've talked about what that could mean. For Michael Carter, that could be that he takes over this backfield week 3, week 4, whatever that looks like. With Trey Sermon, it's okay, well, he's got to wait until Raheem Mostert inevitably goes down with an injury, right? We don't want that to happen, but it's Raheem Mostert at this point. We know that that's going to be the case. So that's kind of the situation here, where it doesn't move those guys up draft boards, because I still have some, there's still uncertainty regarding their roles and what they're going to be season long. Whereas with Darrell Henderson, Gus Edwards, James Robinson, they skyrocketed up draft boards because we knew what their role was now.
All right, well, let's talk about the roles that are going to get filled on your fantasy roster. The top tier, still the same in ECR and half PPR. And again, for all of these, you can go to fantasypros.com/rankings to get all of these. You got the NFL rankings up there. You can sort it however you like, no matter what your league format is. Okay, we got McCaffrey, Cook, Kamara, Derrick Henry. Some people want to flip-flop Henry and Kamara. Do you care? Do you have a preference, or is it just merely about format for you?
For me, I've got Kamara at 2, actually.
Wow. Okay.
In my pre-draft rankings, and then I've got Dalvin Cook and then Derrick Henry. So it's CMC, Kamara, Cook, Henry. But Kamara and Cook, they're separated by just a few fantasy points. I think the Kamara with Jameis Winston starting at quarterback, the workload is going to be there through the air. That's why he's a little bit higher than Cook for me.
Yeah, that Winston starting job did have a positive impact for sure on Kamara's value for me and for you, and I think for most of us. I would still lean Henry over Kamara in the standard. I just do. I like the touchdown equity there, just to throw that as a caveat. Then we get to tier 2, and this is where the controversy begins. At number 5, you got Ezekiel Elliott. At number 6, you've got Aaron Jones. Then Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb at 9, hashtag Chubb Club, and 10, Austin Ekeler. So a very solid tier here, guys. I think everybody would be happy building a team around. But this specific order, one can argue. So let's argue it, because that's why we're here today. How do you see this tier? Is there somebody that's not in this tier you want to put in tier 2? And do you have a different order for some of these names?
Well, let me just run through the order, and then we can kind of break it down. So
okay.
At 5, I've got Ezekiel Elliott, 6, Aaron Jones, 7, Jonathan Taylor, 8, Nick Chubb, and then 9, Saquon Barkley. So we can stop there. So Ezekiel Elliott, I want to start the conversation here, Joe, and I want to ask you, because I know that you've been down like better than consensus or bigger than consensus on Ezekiel Elliott. You've had more concerns about him. And for me, I've still got him at 5. I think that with this offense and the way that it's performing, like he was averaging 19.9 fantasy points per game with Dak on the field. He fell all the way to 9.8 fantasy points per game without him throughout that the back half of 2020. So I think the concern here with Ezekiel Elliott, and the thing that I want to get your opinion on, is valuing him at RB5. There are going to be people that are drafting this weekend that are in the casual leagues. They might not even listen to this podcast, that drafted Ezekiel Elliott and just said, like, you know what, he's fine. And then we get Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 1, which is
with the offensive line injuries.
With the offensive line injuries, this is an absolutely brutal matchup for Ezekiel Elliott. And I posted on Twitter the other day, I was like, go trade for Ezekiel Elliott in your casual fantasy football leagues after week 1, and people lost their minds. They're like, people aren't trading a first-round pick. Yes, they will. Like, in your casual leagues, people will absolutely trade Ezekiel Elliott away. So valuing him at RB5 is more so saying the season-long projection, but you're going to have people that play in a very short window of fantasy football that are very invested in weeks 1, 2, 3, and then they start to tail off, and they may not be as, invested in Ezekiel Elliott long-term. They're going to bail after week 1 because it's not going to be pretty. We have to recognize that. I've got Ezekiel Elliott as a low-end RB1 in my week 1 ranking, so I want to get your opinion here on Ezekiel Elliott. Is he still worth drafting at RB5? I know that you're kind of saying, with your rankings, you're saying no. I still got him at 5, though. I
don't have a problem with people having him at 5 because I understand, and I'm somebody who always likes to give establish credit to a player because he's earned that. But I'm also somebody that's smart enough to understand at this point too, we have to be very careful about the running backs who start to cross over now in terms of age, in terms of seasons. This is going to be, again, his 6th season in the league. If you look historically too, he's got 2 seasons where he scored more than 10 touchdowns, right? It was his rookie season in 2016 behind one of the best offensive lines we've seen in the last 10 years. And then in 2019, he had 14. So I understand 2017, we did miss some time there. But again, whatever, you can only judge the guy on what he's done. My concern is a little bit, you saw the yards per carry go down last year. You saw some Tony Pollard shares go up too in terms of his equity. He had 100 carries last year. I think he could probably be earmarked for 150 potentially this year and not even blink. Like, I think that's something you could really see. So all of that kind of makes me wonder where I think it's not so much how I feel about Elliott, it's how I feel about Elliott compared to the other guys around him. I feel better about Elliott than I do Taylor, but I don't feel better about Elliott than I do Chubb because I feel like Chubb is in the prime now. Like, this is where Elliott was 2 years ago. And I just want to kind of bring that back for people too. And I understand the Kareem Hunt's there, and that's people's concerns that say, well, he's not going to catch enough balls and that's going to hurt him. But kind of like that Derrick Henry thing where everybody kept running that narrative the last 2 years. How'd that work out? Derrick Henry had, 1,500 yards rushing, and then he had 2,000 yards rushing. We all look around at each other and go, yeah, he doesn't catch the ball, but who cares? Yards are yards, touchdowns are touchdowns. As long as that touchdown equity stays steady for Chubb, I think he's going to be in that conversation. So Ezekiel Elliott's not like I'm not going near him at 5, or I would stay away from him at 5. It's just I don't like him as much at 5 because I feel better about Aaron Jones. I feel better about Chubb, those 2 guys in particular. Once you get to that Saquon health too, I also have to look at this, and I'll put this question back to you. When you're looking at this tier, Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, which one of those guys do you think has the better chance to break into tier 1? Because I think it's Barkley.
Yeah, it's Ezekiel Elliott.
Okay, all right.
So I think with Saquon, I think that the fact that he is trending towards playing in week 1, I think that is a good sign, right? But I don't think that he's going to have his full workload that he did, maybe not even until week 3 or 4. It's going to take him a little bit to get his legs under him, right? And granted, he is a freak of nature, and his quads are the size of my entire chest, maybe 2 of them. But I think with Saquon, the concern is just what is his full workload and what is he going to receive that? And again, the offense is not fantastic in New York. It's going to be a bad offense. You've got Kenny Golladay, may not even play in week 1. Daniel Jones has not shown that he can command an offense to the point of making it fantasy relevant. There are injuries all throughout this offense that are going to make it a rough offense to watch.
But it was a bad offense in 2018 when Saquon
I know, but
Saquon had 2,000 all-purpose yards in his rookie season. Can we just I don't know, just kind of breathe that in again for a second, and 15 touchdowns, and that offense was terrible with a quarterback that couldn't move in the pocket at all. So I don't know.
That's part of it.
And a terrible offensive line.
Right. No, the offense was abysmal for New York back then. But the thing was that Eli Manning was just constantly checking it down to Saquon Barkley. And I don't know if Daniel Jones is going to be doing that. Even though you do have the receiving options that are a little bit banged up here, Daniel Jones hasn't been known as much of a check down king as Eli Manning was at that last year of his career, or last couple of years of his career. So I think that's the concern is Saquon Barkley going to get the type of workload that he will need to be able to push his way into the top tier? Now, does he have the talent? No one's denying that whatsoever. Is he a value on where he's going in drafts right now? Yes, I do believe so, because I was in a draft on Sunday, a casual league with a bunch of guys, and he fell to this mid-second round.
Oh,
no one wanted to touch Saquon Barkley.
That's a league winner right there. If that happens, that is a league winner potential. You have to take that risk there. That is just nuts. Even if you're worried, you'd be crazy to pass him up there.
Yes, at that value, that is the point where you take the shot on Saquon Barkley. But that is a different conversation than what we're having right here, which is Ezekiel Elliott. Does he have the potential to push his way into the top tier, or Saquon Barkley? I just don't know if that's there with Saquon this year. I think that he's an incredible talent, but he's got to prove that he can stay healthy. Ezekiel Elliott is incredibly durable. He's played a ton of games over the past few years here, so has rarely missed a game. And I think that Ezekiel Elliott is that guy that has the potential in this offense. Taking aside week 1 matchup against Tampa Bay, I think that he has the potential to launch his way into the top tier.
All right, 2 differences of opinion there, both good ones. As for you all to decide, I feel like there's a karaoke wager waiting to happen there where one of us is going to have to sing a song that the other one chooses. If you're down, I'm in. Something I used to do on all my radio shows. Maybe Saquon Barkley, fantasy points, half PPR against Ezekiel Elliott. Stay tuned. Maybe we'll lock that in later in the week. We'll see. I know one name that you didn't mention just now before we move from tier 2 to tier 3 is Austin Ekeler. Is he not in tier 2 for you?
He is not. I've
Okay.
got Austin Ekeler at RB12 on the year. So Austin Ekeler, I think, is a guy that absolutely provides a very, very safe floor week in and week out. We know the type of workload that he's going to get as a receiver out of the backfield. It's absolutely there. No one's questioning that, right? So I think a very, very safe option. And can he finish with 6 receiving touchdowns on the year? For sure. But the issue here is, one, he missed some games last year, so there's a concern there. And then also, he's had three rushing touchdowns in 2018, 3 rushing touchdowns in 2019, 1 last year. So he's just not used around the goal line. So that, if he was used around the goal line, then he would absolutely be a top 6 option for me because of his workload as a receiver. It's comparative to Alvin Kamara. So if he had that workload around the goal line, then absolutely I would be putting him in that top tier, but he doesn't. So he's one of these guys that it's been really interesting. I've been thinking about this recently with Nick Chubb and Austin Ekeler. I feel like they are both extremely safe options, but for very different reasons, right? Nick Chubb, you have the very, very safe option because you know what you're going to get on the ground with him, that you know the workload you're going to get. He's going to score a ton of rushing touchdowns. He's going to have a very, very high yards per carry, incredibly efficient, but he's not going to be involved much as a receiver. Austin Ekeler, he'll see some work on the ground, but he's not going to have any opportunities to score on the ground, to score on the ground, but he's going to have a ridiculous workload as a receiver. So they're both incredibly safe options, ones that I would feel fine with as an RB1 on my roster, but for very, very different reasons.
5.6 yards per carry last year for Nick Chubb. That's a pretty good number. And it's funny. I'm kind of with you on Ekeler. I have Ekeler where you do. So once again, we're back in lockstep together because they keep trying to find somebody else constantly in this backfield to do the other part of this job. And I don't know if they're just going to eventually just land on Ekeler to do it all. And that's possible. But I think the organization keeps telling you that that's not what they want to do. So it's not their preference. And I think you have to be aware of that. Tier 3, I got to say, I love Tier 3. Big fan of Tier 3. Give me Tier 3 all day long. Yeah. Antonio Gibson, love him. I'm all in. I want it. Now, Najee Harris, I have above him. Expert has him at 12. Antonio Gibson at 11. Joe Mixon, we all know how Yates feels about Joe Mixon. Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 14. Chris Carson at 15. This is that grouping that I would like to put Montgomery in as well at 16, but the tier drops off there at tier 4 on the expert consensus rankings. But this is the tier that I feel like, man, if you can get 2 of these guys, this is the equivalent of having a true top tier guy. And this is why I like drafting at the turn, because personally, Yates, I like to spread out that running back risk a little bit with the injuries, because it is an injury prone position sometimes. So to me, I look at, if you give me the turn of Gibson and Harris or Harris and Mixon, man, that is a really great way to start a football team.
It really is. I love this tier as well. And we make the joke all the time with Dan about, like, ask me on any given day which running back is higher in this tier, and it's going to flip, at least between Antonio Gibson, Joe Mixon, and Najee Harris. As of right now, I've got Gibson at 10, Joe Mixon at 11, Austin Ekeler at 12, and then Najee Harris at 13. And that feels really gross to have Najee Harris outside of my top 12. But that's just how much of a believer I am in Antonio Gibson and Joe Mixon this year. So Najee Harris, I think, is going to be an extremely safe option. He's going to receive a ridiculous workload throughout on the ground and through the air this year. He's one of those guys that you can absolutely build, even though I've got him outside my top 12 running backs. He's one of those guys that you can absolutely build your fantasy football team around this year. And you're talking about on the turn there. If you can get realistically Antonio Gibson and Najee Harris there at that turn, if you want to stack running back there, that is a fantastic start to a draft.
Yeah, could not agree more. Now, this next tier is when things get a little dicey here, Yates. This is where things really kind of open up in terms of difference of opinion, more risk potentially too, also more format-based drafting when we get to tier 4. So starting with David Montgomery in the ECR at 16 overall, he's at the top. I still argue he's in that Carson-Helaire mix, but whatever, no one seems to care or listen to me about that. Then we've got DeAndre Swift, who we heard about an hour and a half or so ago that it seems like Swift is going to be available week 1, but he is already dealing with an injury, and this has been my concern the whole time with Swift. James Robinson, I don't know if you've heard of him, Yates. He's at 18. Then we've got Miles Sanders at 19, Josh Jacobs at 20, Gus Edwards at 21, Mike Davis at 22, Darrell Henderson 23, Myles Gaskin at 24, Kareem Hunt at 25, Damien Harris at 26. These guys, for the most part, especially that last grouping, feel like really good flex plays. As RB2s, this is why I like hitting running back early, because I have much more concerns about this particular tier filling that role, even though the numbers in terms of rankings tell you these are all RB2s for the most part. But if you're able to get 2 true RB1s, even low-end ones, man, you are really working, I think, at an advantage in fantasy leagues. So let's take this tier in terms of your rankings and compare them.
Yeah, this is a big tier. We can spend the rest of the podcast on this group. Yeah, David Montgomery there at the top. He's a guy that I've got at 17. So I'm right there with you in and consensus there with David Montgomery. With Tariq Cohen landing on the pup, we just have a little bit more clarity here. That was something that David Montgomery was kind of hanging around the 19-20 range in my rankings earlier on this offseason. But with Tariq Cohen landing on the pup, out for a minimum of the first 6 weeks of the season, we know that he's going to see at least an uptick in receptions there. So David Montgomery, I feel pretty comfortable with. I feel like he's one of these guys that, does he have top 5 upside like he did or where he finished last year? No, I don't believe so. But with where he is going in drafts right now, I feel like very, very confident in him as an RB2. If I did take, if I did take an Antonio Gibson in the first round, grab a Travis Kelce in the second or whatever, and then come back in the third round and grab David Montgomery, perfectly comfortable with that. James Robinson is next for me at 18. He's, again, one of these guys that with the Travis Etienne injury news, I just feel really, really comfortable with. Yeah. I know that I have concerns about how much Carlos Hyde is going to play a role in this offense. Should Carlos Hyde play a role in this offense? No, but that's a different conversation for another day. I think James Robinson is still just going to be one of these very, very safe options. I don't feel comfortable putting him above guys like Chris Carson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, these other guys here, David Montgomery even. I don't feel comfortable putting him above them, but I do feel very comfortable with his role in this offense. Got him at 18. And then I've got DeAndre Swift at 19, and I'll end the conversation here, Joe, and we can kind of recap it. So DeAndre Swift, I think that even though he is scheduled to play week 1, right? That was the news here that just came out, like you mentioned. Even though he is scheduled to play and supposed to play in week 1, he's not 100%. Like, he has missed some time here. So it's not the question about his injury. It's the question about his conditioning. And how much work is he going to see here in this offense to start the year? Particularly, too, going up against the San Francisco 49ers defense in week 1, it's going to be tough sledding. Like, I'm not expecting much from DeAndre Swift here this week. I've got him as a low-end RB2 in my week 1 rankings. So DeAndre Swift, I feel like, is just another guy that, yeah, he has the upside. He has the talent. There's no doubting that. But even at 19, I look at that ranking and I go, I feel like that might be a little bit too high.
I don't disagree with you. I've been tough on Swift anyway. And once again, this has nothing to do with talent. It has to do with the organization. It has to do with the quarterback play. It has to do with the game script that they're going to be in most of the time in Detroit. It has to do with the fact that they were very clear that they wanted to spread carries anyway when they went out and acquired Jamal Williams. And that's why, when we have this conversation so many times, Yates, about that Tampa wide receiving core, and well, why don't you just take the cheaper of the 3 and Antonio Brown? Sure. I keep coming back to the same thing with Detroit. Well, if I want some running back depth, why don't I just take Jamal Williams, who might see more action than I realize and is significantly cheaper than Swift? And when I'm spending that kind of draft capital on a player like Swift is right now in terms of ADP, I struggle with it. I don't see where it gets better. And that's my problem. And I don't wish this on him. I want DeAndre Swift to be fantastic and run for 1,200 yards and be healthy and 10 touchdowns. It just feels like that's difficult. I also kind of struggle with where Josh Jacobs here is at 20, because I understand Josh Jacobs with Kenyan Drake now, there's concerns there. I get that. But I'm also looking at so far, do you think it's just a matter of people have soured on Josh Jacobs because not only the addition of Drake, but also last year that yards per carry going down an entire yard? He went from 4.8 to 3.9. That's a big drop.
Yeah.
But he did finish as RB8 last year. So that's something like, I feel like we're almost too sour on Josh Jacobs. And I don't like Josh Jacobs, but if you're going to give him to me as a flex, I will take him.
Oh, yeah, as a flex option, even as a low-end RB2, I'm fine with that price tag on Josh Jacobs. Now, here's the thing. As we sit down and we start to change our mindset from like draft and the season-long perspective, and we start to get into like the nitty-gritty and looking at the schedule, right, and breaking it down. I mean, Baltimore in week 1, that's not great.
No.
Pittsburgh in week 2, that's not great. Miami, Los Angeles Chargers, Chicago Bears defense, Denver, Philadelphia, then their bye week in week 8, New York Giants in week 9, Kansas City in week 10. That is a brutal start to the schedule here for Josh Jacobs. So he's one of those guys that, like, I'm fine having him on my roster as a low-end RB2, a high-end RB3, however you want to classify him. But I don't know if you're drafting here within the next couple of days, I don't know if you need to spend that pick on him. I think Josh Jacobs is going to be a trade target. Like, you're going to be able to buy low on Josh Jacobs after week 3. Yeah. You might be able to get him for pennies on the dollar compared to where you drafted him, because he's not going to have ridiculous production here against Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Miami. Those are fantastic run defenses. So I just don't feel confident in Josh Jacobs. He's one of those guys that, yes, I still want to have on my roster because he will provide me value, but at that price tag, maybe not.
Fantastic point with the early schedule there on him. Miles Sanders was above him at 19. I've had a lot of discussions with people about Miles Sanders, and the thoughts and analysis vary widely upon him. Where do you land when it comes to Miles Sanders in terms of how you feel about his stock in 2021?
Yeah, I've got Myles Sanders at RB23 on the year. So I'm a little bit lower than consensus here with Sanders. I have my concerns with, he's an incredibly talented running back. Let me just say that first. Like, he's an incredibly talented running back, incredibly efficient when he gets the opportunity. And I've talked about it. When Doug Peterson was fired, we went, all right, perfect. Here we go. Miles Sanders in for a huge workload. And then Nick Sirianni came along, and it looks like he might be even worse than Doug Peterson as far as utilizing or giving that workload to Miles Sanders as a workhorse back. It's probably just not going to happen. You've got Boston Scott here in this offense. You've still got Kenneth Gainwell. Or I'm sorry, you still got Boston Scott. You've got Kenneth Gainwell now entering the in the 5th round there, who's a fantastic receiver. That's an area where Miles Sanders struggled last year.
Right.
And he's continued to struggle with it throughout training camp and the preseason. So it could be something where we look at Miles Sanders as the 1st and 2nd down back, and then we've got Boston Scott or Kenneth Gainwell coming in on 3rd down. And if that's the case, then in an offense that I'm not projecting to be fantastic by any means, then I've got concerns. I've got concerns about what Miles Sanders can be for fantasy football. I just don't know if the upside is there. So kind of in that same vein of Josh Jacobs, like, yeah, I'm fine having him on my roster, but the price has got to be right.
You know what's fascinating too, Yates, that first matchup against Atlanta. Atlanta's a team that historically, last couple of years, have struggled mightily against running backs who can catch the ball in the backfield. And I just kind of wonder if you start to see Gainwell in week 1 already in that role and he looks good.
Sure.
What kind of, terror starts to run through the veins of Miles Sanders owners everywhere.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like I'm breaking down the matchup there for Philadelphia and Atlanta, and the Atlanta Falcons are actually a pretty good run defense, at least to fantasy points allowed for opposing running backs. And then you look at what they have as far as like receivers and tight ends and the opposing quarterbacks, they get shredded.
Yeah.
And so, it's just because, right, like,
especially in the secondary historically.
The issue is that teams are like, we don't need to run the football, so we'll just pass the ball. And that's what leads to lower production for the running back. So yeah, I definitely think that we could see a little bit more here of Boston Scott or Kenneth Gainwell in week 1 than we might want to see.
You can tell Yates and I are knee deep in it because I've been doing all the DFS stuff, preparing for the DFS show. Yates has been doing his article. So we are in week 1. We're ready to go. We're already looking at these guys playing and how they're going to do. Forget drafting, but if you're still drafting, please abide by what we're talking about. Now, I know you've got Henderson higher. So we all know that. Gus Edwards, Mike Davis, Darrell Henderson, that is a cluster kind of unto themselves, it feels like right now. You've got Henderson, I believe, higher than Edwards and Davis, if that's correct. Yes?
Yeah, I've got Henderson at 16, Gus Edwards at 20, and then Mike Davis at 24.
Okay, so kind of generally the same area, at least with Mike Davis. He's 22. Then you got Gaskin, Kareem Hunt, and Damien Harris. This is a fascinating trio, too, because I think with all 3 of them, they all have their pluses, they all have their minuses. So, out of curiosity, how do you approach this trio of Gaskin, Hunt, and Harris?
Yeah, so I've got Myles Gaskin at RB22, and he's been around that range for me this entire preseason. Like, with the Malcolm Brown situation in week 1 of the preseason, I really didn't panic on Gaskin. I kind of just left him there at RB21, RB22 in my rankings. And then we just got news yesterday, I believe, that Gaskin is going to be the lead guy in this backfield. Like, he is going to be the main guy. Now, you'll see Savon Ahmed. You'll see Malcolm Brown rotate in. They're going to see work, but Myles Gaskin is going to be the main guy here in this offense, and I think that he is going to be peppered with targets out of the backfield. I've talked about Tua Tagovailoa's skill set. When you have Jalen Waddle who can get open underneath, and Myles Gaskin out of the backfield, Tua's going to see whoever is open, and he's going to get the ball out quick to them and accurately. So Gaskin is a fantastic receiver out of the backfield. I think he's going to be a very, very valuable option, particularly in full PPR formats. So if his ADP dropped with all the uncertainty, which I know it did, and you got him as a RB3 or a flex option, however you want to classify that, you got a steal in Myles Gaskin. I think that he is a fantastic RB3 to have on your roster. I would be drafting him even higher than that. So with Kareem Hunt, I'm a little bit lower. I don't understand why Kareem Hunt is all the way up, at least in this range.
Me neither.
I've got him at 28. So it's not like I'm plummeting him down my rankings.
No, but you've got him as a clear, you're saying clearly he's a flex. He's not an RB2 option.
Right.
And I think you're 100% right.
Right. Unless that is baking into his upside if something were to happen to Nick Chubb, right? Because he does have ridiculous upside.
When Nick Chubb missed time last year, Kareem Hunt didn't exactly run away with things. Let's not forget.
Very fair. So I guess like the workload or the potential for upside, let me classify it in that light, is there with Kareem Hunt. But for what we're going to get from him as a change of pace option, quite frankly, to Nick Chubb out of the backfield, I just don't see it there. So I think he's one of these guys that you can, as an RB3, he has value, of course. He's a guy that you can plug in on bye weeks and you can feel comfortable with, but not as a mid or potential, RB2 on your roster. I just don't see that price tag.
All right, fair enough. And then the last guy, Damien Harris, to talk about too. His draft capital has risen. You were getting him as an RB4 a few weeks ago before the Mac Jones saga unfolded. So this is interesting now because now it's about, do you believe in him as a true every week flex running back? I think the answer is yes, because I kind of was higher on him than most people going into the year anyway. And Mac Jones certainly offers more potential for him to see the goal line, which is what you want. Even that preseason game where Cam was leading the team, he handed the ball off to Damien Harris, who scored in that one, which I thought was very positive to see. So I was just encouraged by that. Stevenson is going to be a threat, though, for sure. Yes. He is a bigger back, and I brought this up yesterday on the show with Dan, too. I feel like that's the guy you're going to see more of in the third and fourth quarter, where the defenses on the other side are tired, and then you bring in this big boy with fresh legs, and that's going to be a lot to handle in the third, especially fourth quarter around the goal line and in short yardage situations. But still, I think Damien Harris is right on that fringe, is exactly where he should be, and now he's being drafted as such.
Yeah, I feel like Damien Harris, I've got him at 26. He's RB 26 in consensus. I feel like that's exactly where he should be. I don't want to rely on him as an RB2 because he's still a Patriots running back. Even though Damien Harris is a fantastic running back, and if we put him on any other offense, I feel like he would be potentially a top 12 option. Like, he is a fantastic running back.
Wow.
Yeah,
I like him too. I thought 15, but you put him at 12. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just spitballing a number, but I think
throwing out stuff here.
I'm just throwing out stuff.
I'm just bebopping and scatting.
Yeah. I mean, Damien Harris absolutely could be that because he's a fantastic running back. But in this offense where you still got James White, J.J. Taylor, Ramondre Stevenson, and that goal line carry that we saw, or that carry that we saw in the preseason for Damien Harris that he ended up scoring on was, correct me if I'm wrong, but was from like the 5, 7, 8 yard line. Like, he made a fantastic play to be able to bring it into the end zone. But if they do get down to the 3 to 1 yard line, I think that's going to be Ramondre Stevenson, like it was LeGarrette Blount when he had 18 rushing touchdowns. Like, I feel like that's what we're going to see. We might see some of those goal line carries surrendered there, especially like the goal line, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas the red zone, we might see Damien Harris still be involved. But man, I have concerns. Like, I don't think that he has the true upside to push his way into the top 15 that he would if he was on another team.
Stevenson's touchdown equity, Yates, for me, especially in standard formats, is a guy that I would not leave a standard draft without him on my bench, because he might see 8 carries, but if he scores a touchdown or 2, that's going to be useful enough for you in those standard formats. It just is, which is, frustrating. But if you're still playing those formats, you got to exploit the scoring whenever you can. All right, let's continue on with the running backs here, Yates. And as much as I was concerned with that last tier, this is the tier that I want to live in. I like a lot of these guys here in tier 5. All right, it starts with Javonte Williams, who, every passing day I get a little bit more excited about Javonte Williams.
Yep.
Chase Edmonds, less so. Raheem Mostert, less so. But we all know that. Then at 30, Trey Sermon. Ooh, baby. All the shares. We should do a show next year called All the Shares and Zero Shares. Talk about the guys we got the most of and the guys we won't touch. I'd love to do that show next year. After that, Melvin Gordon at 31, Ronald Jones at 32, Michael Carter at 33, James Conner at 34, Zack Moss at 35, then Leonard Fournette at 36, A.J. Dillon at 37, which is what's fun about this tier is you see teammates, right? You see the Denver guys, you see the San Francisco guys, you see the Arizona guys, and you see the Tampa guys. Tier 5 is called Pick 'em. So let's do it. Let's pick 'em. I want to start. Let's go with Denver. Javonte Williams or Melvin Gordon, pick 'em.
Javonte Williams.
All right. That is the right answer.
I am, yep, like you said, each passing day I get a little bit more excited about Javonte Williams. I'm starting to fall into that category as well, where I think that if Melvin Gordon completely goes away, Javonte Williams is an absolute league winner.
Yes.
Now, you talk about this tier, like so many different teammates, like this is the ambiguous backfields tier. Like, this is where all these guys, Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette, you've got Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, Raheem Mostert, Trey Sermon. Like, all these guys just kind of fall in here where there's the potential for a league winner to come out of this tier based on where they're being drafted, but you have absolutely zero clue which one it's going to be. So Javonte Williams for me is the guy that I want to take the shot on over Melvin Gordon. Now, in ADP, that's holding true, right? Javonte Williams is going as an RB3. Melvin Gordon in most drafts is going as an RB4. No one wants Melvin Gordon. So at that price tag, I'll take Melvin Gordon because I think he has the potential to be a safe option. I did that in our final mock draft, where he's a safe option, right? He's just someone that I can plug in as an RB4 on my roster. He can sit there, and I can plug him into my lineup if I absolutely need to. But Javonte Williams is the guy that I want on my roster.
No, I'm with you. Give me Javonte Williams. If you get Melvin Gordon really late, okay, that's fine. And the handcuffing of
Right.
those two is a little bit better than some other. Look, I always talk about the handcuffing of running backs and if it's a good idea or not a good idea. Most of the time, you want the running backs on other teams that have a lot of upside because then you just keep, getting richer and richer. But this is one where if you have both of them, I'm okay with it. And you mentioned the phrase league winner. Williams, Sermon, I think are potentially that if indeed they reach the potential there. So let's go with the next one here. Chase Edmonds or James Conner? Who would you rather?
I would rather have Chase Edmonds. Now, does that mean that I want Chase Edmonds on my roster? No, not necessarily. The price has got to be right for me to roster Chase Edmonds. And I think that he has more value in full PPR formats versus, a half PPR. I think that he's going to be a guy that his role is probably not going to change. He might see a slight uptick in targets in this offense here in 2021, but not to the point where I feel confident with him, at least at RB28 in ECR. And I mean, he's going around there in ADP as well. There are people that are still very, very excited about Chase Edmonds. So he's one of these guys that, over James Conner, yes, I will prefer Chase Edmonds in a full PPR format, but it still doesn't mean that I want to spend that price tag on him.
Back-to-back in ECR. Mostert or Trey Sermon? Who would you rather, Yates?
I would rather have Trey Sermon because I think that he possesses the most upside for the entire year. And we've talked about the schedule there with San Francisco where that is not where his true value comes from, right? He's going to be a valuable fantasy asset, but that schedule towards the end of the year absolutely means that he's going to potentially carry teams to a fantasy football championship, much like Jonathan Taylor and David Montgomery did last year. So Raheem Mostert is a guy that, I mean, let's just get this out of the way. He's going for 150 yards minimum and 2 touchdowns in week 1 against Detroit. Like, he is going to run wild over. I've got him at RB 15 in my early week 1 rankings. Like, Raheem Mostert is absolutely going to be someone that you want to play in week 1 against Detroit. But then it becomes, okay, how long is he going to be healthy? How long is he going to be on the field? So Trey Sermon is the guy that I want long term.
All right, fair enough. Let's continue on with another one of these. Let's go to Tampa. Leonard Fournette or Ronald Jones?
Do we have to?
We have to. They're paying us to, so we should.
I legitimately don't know, man. Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette. I think that it's Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones is the better running back, in my opinion, but I don't know. I don't know what Bruce Arians is going to do. I think that you're going to see Ronald Jones involved, Leonard Fournette involved, Giovanni Bernard involved enough where Ronald Jones might be the guy that you can plug in as a high-end RB3, a guy that you can just plug in and feel safe with what you're going to get, maybe. Fournette, I really don't want to go near. And then Giovanni Bernard is going to see enough work where it puts a cap on the output here of Jones and Fournette. So unless something happens to one of these other running backs, with specifically Ronald Jones or Leonard Fournette, these guys are going to cannibalize each other from a fantasy football perspective. I don't think that we're going to see one of these guys truly take a step forward and become the starting running back. If they did, top 20. For sure, top 20 running back, but it's one of these ambiguous backfields that if you want to take a shot on, Ronald Jones is the guy that I'd be looking at.
All right, give me the quick hit on Zack Moss. Does he show up in year 2 and perform better, or is this where everybody just moves on and he becomes a guy that what could have been?
I really don't want to roster any of the Buffalo Bills running backs. I've been in that camp the past couple of years, and it's paid off, right? I don't think that we're going to see anything really change here with Devin Singletary looking great. Zack Moss, has the potential. He has the skill set to be great for fantasy football. They're in the right offense, right? The offense is dynamic, where absolutely one of these guys could be fantasy football relevant to the point of, a top 24 running back if they got the job to themselves. But it doesn't happen. You've still got Josh Allen as the goal line back here in this offense. So there's very little upside to rostering either Zack Moss or Devin Singletary this year. And I'm not looking to play him. I'm not really looking to roster him at all this year.
What about A.J. Dillon? Because this is another player, too. I think we all look at the body type and the size and we go, oh, man, this guy can carry 3 guys for 5 yards or maybe even 10 yards.
Right.
Very impressive. But, with Aaron Jones there, it's just a matter of how much is even available. Without an injury to Aaron Jones, is A.J. Dillon worth a draft pick for you?
He is at this price tag. He is as a low-end RB3, high-end RB4, a guy that you can roster and just kind of keep him there on your bench, and he has the upside. He kind of falls into the same camp for me as a Tony Pollard, where Pollard is going to see enough work where maybe you can plug him in as a flex option. A.J. Dillon, maybe you can start him as a flex, but the upside for Dillon or Pollard, who we'll talk about in this next tier, is unspeakable if the the running back above them on the depth chart goes down with an injury. So yes, there is value in rostering them. If AJ Dillon was going, where Melvin Gordon is going, like RB31 or something like that, maybe even higher than that, that would be where I'm like, no, I don't think that that's worth it. But here as at RB37 in ECR, and he's around there in ADP, it absolutely is worth rostering AJ Dillon.
It is now the 7th of September. Are you still as excited about rostering Michael Carter as you were on August 7th?
So, no. And this is because Ty Johnson has taken a step forward and is apparently going to be involved enough in this offense. Whereas where the argument for Michael Carter previously had been, okay, he's got an often injured Tevin Coleman above him on the depth chart. Coleman's going to play 2 or 3 games and he's going to go down with an injury. And then you've got LaMichael Pirine, who really hasn't shown that he can be anything of note for football, right? So with Michael Carter, there was a path for him. Now with Ty Johnson, it's just another body that you're bringing into this backfield. Do I think that Michael Carter is the most talented running back on this roster? Yes, I do. Absolutely. But where the path for Michael Carter to get the starting role here in this offense, it becomes a little bit more hazy with Ty Johnson factoring in and looking as good as he has. So I think Michael Carter is still a guy that I'm feeling confident that he can take over this backfield eventually, but that it becomes a little bit unclear as to when exactly that's going to happen, and that knocks him down a little bit down my board.
All right, let's get to this next tier 2. And starting in tier 6, there's a few guys I want to just kind of highlight for a moment. You got Kenyan Drake was like, why can't I be in that other group with all those other guys who are splitting carries potentially? Jamal Williams at 39, who I think is a tremendous value here, who I would take over Moss, I would take over Dillon, I would take over Carter, I would take over Melvin Gordon, so I still don't get this. I just don't know why everyone's so slow on the uptick to Jamal Williams here. Devin Singletary, who I'm glad you mentioned, has looked good in preseason. He really has. And there was a small glimmer. I was like, do I want to start looking at Zack Moss? And then I watched Devin Singletary in the preseason and went, no, I really don't. I'm just going to run away from this whole thing. Nyheim Hines, and then at 42, Tony Pollard. Let's stop there in tier 6. Then we'll run through the rest of them. Tony Pollard, I'm starting to get a lot of shares of because, once again, I want to reiterate, I feel like there's 150 carries here for him already and the potential for so much more if catastrophe should happen. But what do you think of these 5 guys here? Basically, I'm laying out because Williams, Drake, Singletary, Hines, and Pollard, I think all have potential places. Not the biggest guy on Hines and Singletary, but do you want to make a case for them in PPR?
Yeah, there's absolutely a case to be made for Nyheim Hines and Devin Singletary, particularly in PPR leagues. So I think that Singletary, again, like I'm not going crazy. Do I want to roster Singletary? No, I don't. I think that he's still going to be an RB3 in full PPR formats. But Nyheim Hines finished as a top 24 running back last year, and that was in half PPR. So people forget that. Like he was fantastic last year, and I think he's going to have a role again this year. Now, does that mean that I'm going out there and reaching a round or 2 for Nyheim Hines? No, if he's there, I'll take him. But then Kenyan Drake is the other guy that I want to talk about in this tier because I talk about Josh Jacobs early on in the schedule. Well, if that means that you've got some tough run defenses here, the offensive line is kind of being pieced together here in Las Vegas and some tough run defenses, like I mentioned, then we should want the pass catching back for this team where they're going to be playing from behind most likely. So Kenyan Drake is one of those guys that I'm now starting to look at being like, At his ADP, yeah, he's someone that I'm fine taking. Whereas previously this offseason, I was like, no, I don't want any piece of Kenyan Drake because I don't think that he's going to see enough targets. I think that he could see enough targets here where we at least include him in the flex conversation. Do I want to put him into the top 30 running backs? No, I absolutely do not. But at his price tag, yes, I will look at Kenyan Drake.
All right, this rest of this tier here. David Johnson, Sony Michel, Phillip Lindsay at 45, then crossing past 45 into 51 here. James White, J.D. McKissick, Alexander Madison, Giovanni Bernard, Tevin Coleman, Latavius Murray. Any love on the bench for any of these names?
Absolutely not. David Johnson, I'm not going anywhere near. Phillip Lindsay, no, I'm not going anywhere near him. Even though he might have that first and second down role here. I mean, he might, but that is still not.
It's a deeper 14-team thing. That's what that is to me.
Yes. Yeah. It depends on the league size. James White, I think, will have value, but he's right around where I think he should go. Sony Michel, I think, has some upside, right? If we see Darrell Henderson struggle with his durability, then yeah, Sony Michel has some upside there. So he's worth taking a shot on there. J.D. McKissick, I don't think we're going to see as much involvement with Alex Smith now gone, and Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to push the ball deep downfield. That's what Fitzpatrick does. Alexander Madison falls into the same camp as these other guys, but even when it's kind of the Kareem Hunt, like even when he's gotten the opportunity, Alexander Mattison hasn't produced the way that we think that he should when Dalvin Cook misses time. So Mattison is just a guy that you hold on to the bottom of your bench and you have him there if you're the Dalvin Cook owner. Otherwise, I really don't think that you should be rostering Alexander Mattison.
Yeah, I am in agreement with you. Don't waste your time on that one, too. There's better shots to be taken there. Sonny Michel's a guy I would still roster. James White, I'm a little afraid of, too. I'm a little worried about the age kind of creeping up on him, and Taylor looking like a better version of him. Yeah. A younger, faster, maybe even stronger version of him, too. McKissick, still in PPR, interesting to me. But yeah, this is a tough tier here. And then finally, let's talk about some dart throws. Rashaad Penny is at 52. Now, that is not a dart throw in Yates' world. Yates has all the Rashaad Penny. So are you kind of stunned that he is still, ECR at 52?
So here's why I've been talking about Rashaad Penny all offseason, was because looking at the amount of plays ran for the Seattle Seahawks and looking at how much they were going to run the football, they're not all going to Chris Carson. Mm-hmm. So the RB2 role here in Seattle is absolutely a valuable role for fantasy football. And looking at the depth chart, it was earlier on this offseason, it was Chris Carson, Rashaad Penny, you had Travis Homer, DJ Dallas. Travis Homer and DJ Dallas were not going to rise to take that RB2 job. That was not their skill set. That's not what they're designed to be in the NFL. So that's why I was higher on Rashaad Penny. Now you've got Alex Collins in the mix. And I legitimately don't know who the RB2 is in this backfield. Do I think that it can be Rashaad Penny? And do I think that he has some upside if he secures that role? Absolutely. Could it be Alex Collins? And does he have some upside if he secures that role? Absolutely. So I have actually moved Rashaad Penny down my rankings. I made a big adjustment there right before the last draft weekend, right before this big draft weekend, where I moved Rashaad Penny down because there is some uncertainty here with Alex Collins playing really well and potentially taking that RB2 job. So for me, the way that I process fantasy football is to look at the situations and the roles in offenses and then see, okay, who can that player be that can step into that role? And if I'm wrong on a player and the role that they assume, then I'm wrong. But that's the way that I like to process and look and project. So Rashaad Penny was someone that I thought could be that guy. But if Alex Collins takes that role, then Rashaad Penny's not worth rostering.
All right, rest of this tier: Darrel Williams in Kansas City, Malcolm Brown in Miami, Damien Williams in Chicago. Stevenson, I already mentioned, at 56, I think is somebody that I definitely want on the bench. I think there's upside there. Carlos Hyde, who I don't think is fantasy investable. I'm sure Yates kind of agrees there. And then you come to Kenneth Gainwell at 58, who I think is investable, especially in PPR. I even if it doesn't happen right away, he's a player that I do like to stash and just kind of see what happens, especially in those deeper formats where running back can get away for you. There's potential here at the very least because of his acumen for catching the football. Any of these other guys that you want pieces of on your roster that I just mentioned?
I think at this point, the rest of these guys, from tier 7 on, we don't have to break down any other tiers because all these guys are just kind of like stash players, right? They're just, You're stashing them on the bottom of your bench based on where they're going in ADP and you're seeing what happens. So Darrel Williams is a guy that I'm absolutely stashing on the bottom of my redraft benches because he's the RB2 in Kansas City. Unquestioned, he's the RB2 here. He's going to see some work in relief of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It's not going to be enough where it detracts me away from CEH as a top 15 running back, but he's going to see some work in relief, and he comes with upside if CEH were to miss time with an injury. So as an RB5 on your roster, Darrel Williams, absolutely. Ramondre Stevenson is absolutely someone that you can look at in the deeper leagues. I think that unless we see something happen to Damien Harris, he's not going to be a guy that you're wanting to roll out into your starting lineup. Kenneth Gainwell for sure, Joe. I think that he is someone that you're probably going to have to wait a few weeks to see what he becomes. So you got to be patient with him. You can't draft him or add him to the bottom of your roster and then cut him in week 1. He's going to be one of those guys that you're holding on to. Patience. You're going to have patience with. And then after that, the rest of these guys just kind of all fall into a cluster. But the two that I want to single out here are Wayne Gallman, who just signed in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. With Mike Davis, I've talked about his durability concerns. I've talked about what happens with Mike Davis if he can't handle the type of workload that he's going to see here in this Atlanta backfield. You've got only technically two running backs, and then Cordell Patterson, however you want to classify Flash. It's Wayne Gallman and it is Mike Davis. Mm-hmm. So Gallman is absolutely going to see carries in this backfield. Does that move me off of Mike Davis at his current ADP? No, it does not. Davis is going to be fine. I think he's still going to come out of the gates on fire. But you're going to see Gallman involved here. And in our final mock draft, it said I could have waited 10 rounds to get Wayne Gallman in our final round of that final mock draft. But I wanted to add him to the bottom of our roster to show people that we're heading into draft weekend, that Gallman is going to be relevant for fantasy football this year in this situation. Gallman's a good running back. and he's going to see some work here. So
he performed well last year.
He did.
He had a good run of about 6 weeks where he was a very useful RB2. I want to guess who the other one is because you stole my thunder. There were two guys that I thought that were left on the board. One was Gallman that I knew you wanted to talk about. And then there's two more guys. There's Tyson Williams at 78, who I want to talk about, and then 83, Tony Jones in ECR. Is one of those guys the remaining guys?
Yep, for sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Tony Jones Jr. is the guy that I want to talk about because there is the potential that he has the RB2 role here in New Orleans. And I talk about roles, and I talk about Rashaad Penny there with Seattle. Excuse me. The RB2 role in New Orleans is absolutely valuable for fantasy purposes. So where Tony Jones Jr. is going right now is RB 83 in ECR. I mean, he's further down the board than that in ADP. Like, he is on the waiver wire in the majority of leagues now, where you can still scoop up Tony Jones Jr. and hold him on the bottom of your bench to see what happens here in week 1. Does he have the RB2 role over Latavius Murray? Latavius Murray is RB 51 in ECR. Jones is 83. I think it should be flipped. I think Tony Jones Jr. should be RB 51 and Latavius Murray should be RB 83 because I think Murray is just now a depth piece. I think that Sean Payton knows what he has, and Latavius Murray, he knows that he can plug him in if he needs him, but Tony Jones Jr. absolutely has the potential to be a very, very valuable fantasy asset that comes with ridiculous upside if something were to happen to Alvin Kamara.
Tyson Williams for me, Yates. This is a team that's just going to run the football a ton. They're going to need a lot of... It's just like the reason I liked Gus Edwards last year is the same reason I like Tyson Edwards and Tyson Williams, right? Excuse me. And he had just made them one guy. I like the relationship, like Benifer. But Tyson Williams for me is a guy when you watch him in the preseason, you say, well, this guy's not bad. Like, he has a little bit of explosiveness here. You know the offensive line is built for running the football. So once again, in terms of equity and stock that you're buying very low and stashing on your bench, especially in those 14-team leagues, it becomes a fascinating piece if something happens to Edwards or if they decide to split the workload a little bit more. And that's a player that I'm starting to take some shares of in these last couple of weeks since the Dobbins injury. And it's funny, I feel like I've got more shares of him because of where he's going than I do of Gus Edwards because of how he got elevated in ADP.
I think people are looking constantly for who is the James Robinson of this year.
Right.
And the two players that I think have a very, very strong possibility of being the James Robinson of this year are the ones that we just mentioned with Tyson Williams and Tony Jones Jr.
There you go. It doesn't get better than that. We're going to leave on a high note. Once again, if you want to take a look at these rankings, you can go to the expert consensus rankings over on fantasypros.com/rankings, and you can check them all out there. You could sort them however you like in PPR, standard, and whatnot. And make sure you go keep running those mock drafts. If indeed you got a draft coming up, it's the best way to get prepared. We all know that. We've got our week 1 coverage that's here already at Fantasy Pros. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/fantasypros. And don't forget, when you subscribe, click that little notifications bell so you know when everything drops. We got all kinds of amazing videos, not just the podcasts that are out there too. Yates is doing videos, I'm doing videos, Lauren's doing videos. Maybe even they'll let Dan Harris do a video or two. I don't know. But I'm telling you, we got so many cool things this year that we didn't have last year. We keep pushing out great content. And when you subscribe, that gives you that 3x entry into the contest. Go to fantasypros.com/contest to get that Kyler Murray autograph football. Today, I want to thank the sponsors of today's show, RT Sports. Go get involved. Sign up today with the promo code PROS. Get a 20% off deposit match when you sign up for the Fantasy Championship at rtsports.com. And remember, boys and girls, go to Pristine Auction, PRISTINE auction.com. Use the promo code FantasyPros to get $5 credit on us and start bidding for some cool stuff for this NFL season or whatever sport you love or whatever you love. They got lots of cool things there for you. And Yates, I'm just excited, man. I feel like we're finally here. We had that little holiday weekend. I feel refreshed. Football is actually mattering and happening on Thursday night, and we're going to be here for it all. We want you to join us as well. So that'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Yates, I'm Joey P. We will see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.